and welcome to yet another Zensible webinar. Today, we are talking about how to train our brains with sports psychology. With more awareness to mental health, 90% of professional athletes believe that mental resilience is just as important as physical training. I'm sure you have all heard about Simone Biles, who is very outspoken about mental health. And someone close to home, even Virat Kohli, has spoken about mental fatigue and depression and the need for psychological support for athletes. So sports psychology is not just about winning medals, it's also about building focus, managing stress, and optimizing performance under pressure. But here is the exciting part for those who have joined the session. Many of these techniques can also be applied beyond sports, helping professionals, students, and everyday people just like you and me perform at our best. To help us understand how to do that, we have Disha Mussaddi. Disha is a sports psychology consultant currently working with Reliance Foundation Youth Sports. Disha brings many years of experience in high performance environments. She has worked with precision sports, track and field, team sports at major international events. So thank you for being here with us, Disha.
Thank you, Veda, for that introduction.
Of course, we are so happy to have you here with us. And you know me, I'm Veda from Zensible. And as we converse with Disha, for those who have just joined, feel free to keep the chat window active with your comments and questions. We love a really good, lively chat on the side. We will pick up all of your questions in the last 15 minutes of this webinar. Okay, so Disha, let's start with the most important question that's there in my mind and everybody else's mind. If me or somebody else here decide to become a sports psychologist, what can we expect? Can we expect to work with the really elite athletes, the ones who are constantly captured in the media and travel around the world wherever they go? That all sounds very interesting.
Exciting, yes. It sounds very exciting. I think that's something which I find my job very exciting. It's a very exciting part of it. But I think first, if you want to come into sports or be a sports psychologist, I think it was very important to have a passion for sports, to be someone who is very adaptable in nature because, it's not a very typical 9 to 5 job. Like, I think there are days when we start work as early as 6 in the morning or 6:30 or we end at 11 p.m. And that is because, people train, our athletes are training early. We have our sessions till late, or maybe we finish work at 10, we have dinner and we pack up and we come. Or when you're traveling for competitions and you're working on a Sunday or a Saturday. So I think you have to be very adaptable and in your way of working. I think for me, the most important thing is it's not as glamorous. Like, I know we make it sound very exciting, like traveling with the world, working with the elites, but it's not. We shouldn't enter the field thinking about, oh, I will join an IPL team when I become a sports psychologist, or I will work towards Olympics. Because I think a lot of us, there are opportunities at a grassroots level, at a developmental level, and I think that works a lot for a lot of us. Personally, I started my career with at a grassroots level, and then I've progressed. Then there are some people who are my peers and my friends who enjoy working with younger kids and focus a little on the elites. And there are some who just like to focus in elites. So there's work for everyone. So I think the whole idea that, oh, I'm here only for elites, I'm here only for IPL, I think that would be a little um, wrong notion we have. And we try to glamorize it a lot. And that may not necessarily be there because it's also a very political space. You deal with a lot of emotions, a lot of ego, and you will be dealing with a lot of federations, government, especially at an elite level. Or even if, say, you're working with younger, like a 16-year-old who's representing India, you will have those experiences. So I think that is definitely there. So it's not glamorous. So be open to the idea that, okay, I will have to adapt. I will have to travel if need be. But it is also something where I need to be very ethical because it's so toxic, perhaps. It can be a very good place also, but still you have to be very ethical. I think the one most, again, an important point is that for me is, yeah, I think ethics because I have personally worked in different spaces and it really helped me when I'm traveling with athletes to be ethical. Um, because when you are in a space you are very vulnerable, you are also you have to be very um you are staying with them, not in the same room, but perhaps in the same hotel. You're seeing them 24/7, you're seeing them at odd hours. So I think it was very important to be someone who maintains the confidentiality, the professionalism, and it can be a little stifling. So finding that right balance of being friendly but not too friendly is also important. So yeah. So I'll just go through the points. I know I've crossed over a lot. So it's being adaptable, not stepping in because you want to work with elites. Be open to the idea of working with grassroots and developmental. It's not a typical 9 to 5 job, and be as ethical. And I think one very important point, also be passionate. And the last point is that I know a lot of us who are very passionate have this thing that, oh, I didn't make it in sports. That's why I'm here. It's a very good emotion to have. It's good you're passionate, but at times we need to also understand that that should not come into our way and our relations with our athletes because we kind of put our expectations, which is not something which psychologists do. So I think that's also something where we can distinguish between our emotions and our goals and the athlete's goals.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, that makes sense. And that is so different, Disha. Like if you are a regular counseling psychologist or even a clinical psychologist, you see your clients probably once a week, maybe twice a week, but that's not the case with the sports psychology. You travel with them, you eat with them, you hang out with them. That does not happen. So is it very different from you've already mentioned it is different, but how do you adapt to that? How do you um, move from being, oh, okay, they are your clients? Do you cross over, and do you also become kind of more closer friends with them? Do you know them much more intrinsically? And does that help or hinder your counseling process?
So, like you correctly mentioned also that, there are a lot of similarities and dissimilarities. Um, we do become, especially it depends on which kind of program you are. Is it a residential program or is it like a space where, the athletes just come, train, and then they leave? So it depends again there. So if you're a residential program, the chances of seeing the athletes more and at different time and being closer to the athlete is higher, but that's also where you draw the line that okay, what kind of conversations I want to have and when and where. So I think that is very important, and drawing those boundaries and being firm with about it with your athletes and being also mindful and constantly checking in with yourself. That is, I think, very important, and that really helped me because I've mostly worked in residential programs. Whereas in a boarding kind of a program where you come, you meet the athletes, and you go back, it's very different because, I just see the athletes for some time. So I have my hours, I meet them, and I leave. And in both the cases, you will be, as a sports psychologist, doing a lot of on-field observations. You will be on field, you will be seeing them in going for their rehab and having discussions about everything. So you do become close. You do know a lot more nuances about them. You will know a lot about some things like which athlete is having their periods when, or I think once I had a conversation with an athlete about how they like their digestive system before a competition. Like, do they like to defecate or not? And I think we have had those conversations. And it is very, it's not a very, it's very weird when we talk about it, but I think it's very important because it does impact performance. It does something which impacts the athlete. So it is, when we're having that conversation, but we kind of don't shy away, but we also know not to giggle, not to make fun of them, not to judge them, but maintain our boundaries.
Okay. So you mentioned that you watch them on field as well,
Mhm.
right? Does that mean that you need to know about the sport that they are into to a larger extent, like the intricacies of the sport? If they are into archery, then do you need to know a little bit more about the techniques of archery? Is that how it works?
Yes and no. So, for as a therapist, it's always good to know a lot about the sport you're working with. So, if let's say you're working with hockey, you should know about the different positions, you should know about the different roles and challenges, and what is the world standards and everything. And like, let's say, okay, what are the physical tests that, to qualify to make it to the India team? Like, if you're doing a yo-yo test, what is it? You need to know these markers. But as a psychologist, you are never the technical coach and you can't become a SNC, like the strength and conditioning coach or the physiotherapist. So we avoid giving advice. You need to know that so that when an athlete brings it up, and you may want to understand the context behind their concerns. So you understand those points easily. You don't have to read up on it immediately, or you can ask for time and read up to understand where those concerns are coming. Are they pointless or are they actually factual or they have a base? But I think it's very staying not interfering with another professional's work is also very important. That's again where boundaries and ethics comes into place. That you don't become like, okay, you know what, I was seeing your technique, it seemed wrong. And I think that's not something which, as a psychologist, we should do or not give them advice. Oh, I was seeing you were moving a lot when you were shooting, or the way your grip was not seeming right. Change it. That's not some comments we can make, and that's not a space for a psychologist. That's for the coach. If we feel it's something questionable, perhaps we can discuss it with the coach. I felt something was different, but we again don't bring it with the athlete because you don't want to put ideas into their head. Maybe that's their technique, but you can discuss it with the coach to understand, or you can ask the athlete, how did you feel? Did you feel something was there? I was observing. Did I notice something was different? I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you can take them through those conversations. Again, these conversations have to be done in the correct time, not during a competition. Maybe in that reflective period or the transition period between the 2, 3 competitions or between 3, 4 training blocks, or perhaps when we have an off season. So I would really do a lot of reflections about the previous season, what I observed with an athlete, so that we have some meaning behind what I have observed, and the athletes also understand what is my role on field. Like I'm just not coming and staring at them. I'm actually observing, making points, and then seeing what is it and trying to make sense of it and understanding the performance behavior.
That is very interesting. You say that you will observe, and during off season, you will go and help them. That I observed this. I see you do this. So my question is, in normal counseling settings, the clients reach out to the therapist and they come to them for help. Is this the same case with sports psychology? Do the athletes reach out to you to help them or guide them, or do you do it on your own?
Um, it depends from the kind of work or the nature of your organization. So let's say you're a private practitioner, Veda, or anyone here is a private practitioner. In that case, perhaps an athlete approaches you. So who's your client? The athlete is your client, or perhaps a parent of the athlete is your client, right? If it's an underage athlete. Or imagine I am here and I've been approached by a company to work as their employee. Then I am a client. My client is not the athlete; it's the employer. So it depends on who is your client. Okay, so let's say if I'm working, I'm actually brought in by a company to work with the athletes, then it becomes my role to actually go to the athlete and maybe, discuss certain things, give them a time. And then initially, someone would be more fixed about, okay, this is time we have to have, will be more educative, will be more like taking intake. And I will schedule that time. And gradually, once I've established that rapport, I'll start having those sessions paced and based on the athlete's needs and time and schedule. But if I am someone who the athlete is approaching and the athlete wants to have sessions, say once a week, I would do that. Maybe I'll even give that space to an athlete to come back after 2, 3 months. But in for me personally, in my experience of sports psychology, what has actually been very important is that commitment. That sports psychology doesn't happen like it's not like a 1 hour once a week or 1 hour in 2 week session. It's more about it's about being more regular and having that commitment from the athlete, because at the end it's the athlete who's on the field performing, and we all are just there to support them. So we need to empower them. So the athlete has to really have that commitment towards what they're working. So there are moments where, I'm meeting an athlete and having the similar conversation almost every day. Because I may be in a residential program, or I may be bumping into the athlete every day. Or it could also be that, I have a 15-minute with an athlete every alternate day. And in some cases, I have a 2 hour session with an athlete once a week to just revisit everything that we've noticed in the week and have that conversation about those things. So it's really very, I think it's very individual focused, and it's not a fixed way of working, unlike counseling. So it's very different in that way. So yeah. And sorry, I'll correct one thing which I mentioned. We don't only discuss our observations off season. We do it during training, but not as much unless an athlete or a coach asks for it. So it's not only that I'm working during off season or transition. I'm also working during training and competition phases.
Mm. Yeah, okay. I understood that. I mean, I just picked up on the off-season bit when you said you talk about it. One thing really caught my attention. You said that the athlete may approach you. In that case, the athlete is the client. The underage athlete's parent may approach you, in which case the parent is the client. And sometimes the organization may approach you, in which case the organization is your client. How does confidentiality work? Does it work differently in these different cases? And is it different from other types of counseling?
I think confidentiality is more or less the same. It's like, okay, eventually what the athlete discusses is going to stay with the athlete and me. So of course, in a case of some, let's say I'll give all three situations, okay? So if there is an athlete who's an adult athlete who has approached me. Now the athlete is talking to me about certain concerns they're having regarding performance. They're choking under pressure. We are working. And when discussing, we noticed that, okay, we can bring in the coach and the parent as well. It's now for the athlete to decide how much of who they want to bring into that session. So they may say, okay, please talk to my coach regarding this, and they may want me to connect with my coach. Oh, sorry, with their coach. And that could happen. And that is a possibility. But that is something what we discuss with the athlete will stay with the athlete. I wouldn't, you know, speak about everything that the athlete has said about the personal and other performance aspects without the athlete's consent. So it's a similar contract, confidentiality form. Before I approach the coach, athlete and I will sit and plan what we want to discuss and take them through that. In those cases, there will be some conversation alone with the coach, and in some cases, some conversations with the athlete for the athlete to understand what is happening. Now, let's say if an athlete has come to me, he's underrated. Ethically, that athlete is not, legally allowed to sign any documents. The parents sign it, so they are my clients till the athlete is 18. So a lot of things which we discuss will actually involve the parents, because in such cases you're working with the parents or with the coach as much, because they are the guardians, they are the ones who will actually be the key decision makers. So even though the athlete is there, they're cognitively, even though they're aware, they're very insightful, they're intelligent, but they may not be able to make a lot of decisions, and that those decisions are made by the parents or the coaches. So their involvement will be a lot. So in that case, a lot of things will be actually confidentially very different. As in, I would say certain things to the parents, to the coach, which they need to know, but the athlete will be aware of what I will be sharing. Okay. Now imagine my client is a company. Let's say there is a company ABC who has recruited me. They have a developmental program where they plan to take athletes to the next level, and I am brought in. So the company wants me to provide performance data or performance information. So that means anything which is performance related, certain conversations which is performance related, I may have to put it up in the meetings. I may have to show their assessments, the data that I have acquired over the past few months or past few days to the company because that they are my clients. But anything which is personal, I can again maintain it with the confidentiality of the athlete because even in a company, athlete is at the center of practice. And we are all there working for the athlete to help the athlete be better. So that's where confidentiality is different. The amount, the kind of information that will come out is different, but it's at the core, we are trying to protect the athlete and we're actually having athlete's interest in the middle on the core of it.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And thank you so much for explaining it so clearly. Now, again, in one or all of these situations, right? When we talk about professional athletes, not just organizations that recruit them, but even we as a public or the media, they want to see them as this amazing, larger than life, very capable people, right? So, and you also go give certain performance metrics, etc. How do they open up to you, knowing that, how do they show that vulnerability? Because it's very important to be at that peak performance thing. How can they, do they open up and show their vulnerability that easily in this situation?
Um, I've actually had my fair share of challenges to this. So thank you for bringing this question. Um, I think that's where being on field really worked for me. For an athlete, seeing someone on field, coming and seeing their training, observing, trying to understand is very important. And when you're on field and you actually try to be a part of it, but still stay away from that whole, like, it's like a kind of like an ethnographic work. You're being a part of the team, but still staying away and observing and understanding. It has really worked for me because athletes understood that I'm trying to study the sport, I'm trying to study them. I am understanding the little behaviors, the performance behaviors, which we call like how they're executing the task, the mental aspect. And then they come and they ask, okay, we saw you observe something. Could you explain what it is? So I bring up a point or two that I noticed these things, but so what do you think about it? Or I bring it in the meeting with the coach and the athlete, depending on the situation it is. And athletes, when they see that, when they really see that, they understand, okay, what your value is. And that helps them open up to you. In some cases, there are some athletes, who find that respite because, sports is very high performance driven. And suddenly there's this one person who's trying to understand the person and the performer. It's more about understanding, giving them that space, non-judgmental space. So they actually find that respite and they try to open up even more. So I've actually seen both spaces where I've had to be a lot more on field and I've had those easy cases where, the athlete did open up. So that was one point for me. I think another challenge way I addressed it was talking to coaches and having the coaches buy in. Especially, I think that's something which I've adopted when I work with a lot of organizations or even coaches and athletes is, although I'm athlete centered, the coach is the key person who makes the decisions in a lot of sports, in a lot of events. So having coach and having to work with the coach and understand them and, sometimes you just work on the feedback of a coach, how they provided to an athlete. That really helps. So for me, getting the coach's buy-in was more important than athletes because the minute the coach said, yes, Disha, you can work with my athlete, the athlete would work with me because the coach kind of nudges the athlete. Okay, there's a psychologist. I think, she knows her bit or he knows her bit. You could go to them. And it just opens that space for you. So these two strategies are very important and it really helps in making an athlete open up to you and be vulnerable to you.
So I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, and I'm going to ask you a question. What if there isn't coaches buy-in? Like, what happens when you know that the athlete is, having problems under pressure, but you are not able to get the coaches buy-in? They are like, you know what, this is about winning, and the athlete just has to suck it up and do it, right? There are people who have that sort of thought process. What do you do in those situations? How do you handle that? Because it's a very, very fine balance between telling the athlete to, care for themselves, which may go against the coach's wishes. How do you balance that?
So in that case, I think it's for me, in my experience, I'm not saying that this is 100% effective, but it has helped in certain cases. Is talk to an athlete and make them realize that, you know, it's certain decisions they have to make and they know the consequences of it. And at the end, they are the ones who are at the one who will be executing the task, no matter who's coaching, who's the side, sitting on the side, and they have to take that decision. So perhaps let's say that there's a coach and the athlete, the coach isn't keen to have a psychologist, but the athlete really wants one. So the athlete decides, okay, what kind of support, how to include the psychologist, and the psychologist and athlete has to be, has to agree to it. And then that we need to understand that fine line that, okay, this is the way we'll work. And perhaps the athlete will be the one talking with the coach instead of the psychologist. So I think that kind of is a understanding which is there. And if let's say in that case an athlete is also someone who's like, oh, the coach doesn't want, I just want you to come and do this band-aid, just do the little quick fixes for me. And it may not, but if that's okay with the psychologist could do that, like have a few solutions, like a few skills. They can just tell the athlete, okay, there's a skill, like let's just do visualization, it'll help you in the skills. Let's try to fix your pre-performance routine, as in a routine which is before you execute a task or when you're executing a task. Let's fix that up a little. And if those things are there and we can just help them, guide them, and maybe take a step back.
Mhm. Okay, okay. So let's try and connect some of the concepts that we are talking about in sports psychology with general public as well, right? Both people who are working professionals, students, and definitely athletes, they get into burnout situations, right? Because they push themselves, they want to be the best, and it reaches the burnout stage. How do you notice that? What do you do then? How do you recommend them that they step back, especially when they are so close to the finish line and they are like pushing, training? So how do you identify that, and how do you help them?
So even if I look at, like, we understand burnout is emotional and physical exhaustion, and it's never a, it's a very weird feeling for an athlete. It's not a very pleasant. It's not. It can, and it's very painful and emotional experience for an athlete. So I think burnout we can understand at a much earlier stage when we understand what are the, if we can find the few signs and differences. Like let's say we find certain signs in their sleep, or in their diet. Like, okay, they're not eating well. We see a lot of weight loss suddenly. They are more prone to injury. Suddenly they start devaluing their sport, like, oh, it's not important. I don't care about sport. They start missing sessions. They're late for sessions. Like if someone is very punctual and suddenly start becoming late. These are little signs you can notice. Then, suddenly the athlete starts feeling, there's a sense of worthlessness kind of a thing. Like they don't believe in their efficacy, that they have the ability, or they don't feel that, oh, they're as successful as they used to be in the past. Like, they can't reach that same level of performance now anymore. So these are few signs they can identify burnout with. But I think the most important point for burnout is understanding what is the reason for burnout. Is it because of overtraining or lack of recovery? Is it because of staleness, as in there's monotony, there's no nothing, no challenge there? Are they not feeling, or they feel that, it's the same thing they're doing a lot every day and they're not really seeing anything coming out of it? Or is it because of learned helplessness? In a lot of cases, burnout actually happens. Personally, I've actually, as a therapist, I've seen burnout a lot from learned helplessness. That, people they feel they have this reduced sense of control and things aren't really going right. And suddenly they just develop this feeling of, okay, you know what, this is how things are. They become helpless, they become hopeless, and this is what they've accepted, and they keep pushing, and then you start noticing signs of burnout. And I think that is something, when you identify these three, you can define which sports science staff gets involved to what extent. So let's say you're totally exhausted due to overtraining. You're training crazily for 8 hours. You're every day going all out, like intensity wise, and your volume of your training is very heavy, very high. So perhaps that's where the coach, the SNC, the physiotherapist, the doctor, they all come into picture and they all say that, okay, this is not right. This physically, they're really pushing their limits. We can see the body is breaking. They're really prone to injuries. A lot of injuries happening. They're not sleeping. They're losing a lot of weight and muscle mass, or we know that certain other metrics are not really right. So every professional comes in and provides is either we work with the training load, we add recovery, we change the diet, we add more things. So there are these everyone works together. In case of stillness, that's where we work a lot more with the motivation as a psychologist, because you want to understand where is that stillness coming from. Like, why are they not feeling, like, is it that it's not suddenly internally they're not as driven as they were? Is it that, the task is not as challenging, or is that stillness actually going towards that learned helplessness because suddenly they've lost that autonomy? Or is it not as fun with the friends, or what is the main reason for that stillness, and address that motivation aspect there, and try to make it like, help them, empower them, and help them understand what they can do as an athlete. And then the coach can come in and help them with strategies to, boost their competence level, or give them some things which they helps them, that autonomy, boost their autonomy. Now, if there is someone who's got learned helplessness, I think learned helplessness is a very more therapeutic approach, which will have, because you will have go through, you may go through aspects of CBT, ACT, and start working on those areas to help athlete understand themselves, connect with themselves, make them feel more powerful, because there's this powerlessness, the sense of power has gone. You try to work on those areas. In many cases, I have actually taken help of clinical therapist in such cases, because we kind of understood that there were certain patterns that were coming which is beyond my scope of work. So it is very nuanced working with burnout. So I think we can go this approach in sports, even with younger athletes. And strangely, I think these reasons are not only present in athletes, they're also present in coaches. I have personally have experienced burnout for all three reasons in different places where I've worked. So I think I could also notice that, okay, I'm overworked. Okay, I had this helplessness because there were decisions not made by me. And these feelings do come in and kind of make you feel burnt out at work.
Yeah, that is really, really good, Disha, because as you were speaking, I'm trying to correlate it with workforce. And you mentioned three things. One is they are overworking themselves, and two is it's monotonous and they don't have enjoyment anymore. And three is learned helplessness. That is, they are not in control of some of the decisions or many of the decisions that are happening, and that really gets them down. And the same thing is applicable even for students or work employees in workforce. If they are doing the same thing, they're studying the same subject over and over and over and over again, or if they are doing the same job over and over again, it is likely to lead to burnout. And we often only think of burnout as you're overworked, but these other two are also causes of burnout. I really, really like that. Let me ask you one thing, which might also translate to outside sports. The way you train and coach and help athletes who are in an individual sport and who are in a team sport, are there any difference there?
Actually, quite a lot of difference when you're working with an individual and team sport. So I'll go back to the conversation we had. Who's your client? So
Mm,
in an individual sport, maybe the individual may be my client, or a company which has brought me in. But it never be a team that's my client. But in a team sport, it's never an individual. It's very rare an individual who's your client. It's actually the team who's your client. So I think that really kind of shows, how the way the work starts. It'll be very different from for each of them. So in individual, I try to understand the individual athlete, them in their team, in their ecosystem, and it is more about empowering that athlete based on their individual needs, and where everyone else, like the coach, physios, SNC, let's say the biomech specialist, or even the nutritionist, we all work to help the athlete be a better version of themselves, or be the best version of themselves. And in the athlete, we try to help them understand, be more aware of themselves. We try to help them understand, what is their goals, what does success mean to them, what is it that they really value in their sport, and take them through that and empower them and empower them like this. Another thing in individual sport is, because you're all by yourself performing, it can be very emotionally and psychologically very daunting, because suddenly all the decisions or the entire accountability and responsibility is on you. So I think those aspects are something which you focus more on individual sports. Whereas in team sports, it's like a group of individuals who are working with. So, there's a shared value, there's a shared vision, there's a shared goal, and everyone is working towards that. So, your goals will also have to be somewhere aligned with those goals. So, even if you're an individual athlete, it has to be somewhat aligned with that goal of the team to help the team better. Because at the end, we need to look at it as a team. And then, of course, you do have individual sessions with athletes, you do have individual interactions, you help an athlete reach their individual goals, but it should all be in alignment with the team goals. So there would be more team interactions, there would be more, understanding the dynamics of the team. In a team sport, you'll see the leadership is very important, like the formal leaders, informal leaders. These little dynamics will come up, and they play a very important role for an athlete or for the whole decision making of the group or the strategy. So it becomes very different the way you work and how you approach a situation.
So, do you then, if there are any team dynamic issues, do you get them both or all the team together and then you help them? Does it become ever like a group therapy?
It does become aspects of it, like some topics we do bring it as a group. But in many cases, it depends on who will be the one addressing it. Is it the coach who addresses it, or is it the therapist who addresses it? So I think that's always something in a team sport. It's more a lot of, where you do group sessions, you do have those group therapies, but also certain things are group coach led a lot more. That, let's say, if there is a concern which between two athletes or between a few groups, there you see this little clicks. So even though the psychologist helps in building the respect and the team spirit, but it's the coach who addresses the actual core issue in a lot of ways, because there's this whole good cop bad cop conversation. So I think that's again an understanding. So I've worked with coaches who've been very supportive and like, okay, this is a conversation for me to take up. In some cases, the coaches have been like, listen, I'm not involved in any of this. So it depends, who's going to be the one to have those conversations.
Okay. So you mentioned something, and this will be like transference or counter transference towards you. You said that if you are in an individual sport, you are, you get a lot more tensed because everything depends on you. You are in the spotlight. But for me, if I was ever, thankfully, I'm not an athlete. If I was ever an athlete, what would bother me is if I was in a team sport and if I did poorly, then it will bring the entire team down,
Exactly.
right? So,
Yes.
do you feel that kind of a tension also coming from people like, oh my God, I let the entire team down. I am not at my optimal level. I am not performing at my level I should be, and that's affecting my entire team. And how do you tell them that it's okay?
I think that comes with a lot of that, the orientation we have. An athlete has, like, is it mastery orientation? It's a performance orientation. It's the expectation. How it's also, it could be, what is happening behind the scenes. Like, maybe the team members are saying, oh, अरे तुमने तो हरा दिया हमें. Those things can happen, and it is a very natural thing. So, or, the coach could be like, this one decision was something which led the team to lose today. So I think if when you have those aspects there, it is something which you need to address in with the athlete, and that's where the individual sessions come in. There's also possibility of social loafing, that okay, in team sports, there's like two main people who are doing everything, the rest are just the loafers there. Or it could also be, completely like everyone is doing their part. So it depends. Like, of course, there is an individual conversation which will happen in team, and we need to address it, because at the end, it's these individuals who make that team. So if an individual is not happy in that team, or is not really doing, the team is not really going to be. as successful or is not going to be achieving those results and those goals. So I think that's something which I'd read up at some point when I was working on high performance culture a couple of weeks ago, was that you know um it's not, it's like, it's when everyone is good, that's when you actually, or everyone's on the same page, that's what helps the team. But like, if there's a little problem, it may not be a reason why you step back, but it could also be it will not help you achieve what you really want. So that's something which is very important when you're working in a team sport, to understand that everyone, all of them are actually performing optimally, are at their best space, and they are um, doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. They have those different roles, they're performing those roles, they've got that clarity about it. And yeah, they're not dependent on each other for everything. Of course, there is a communication which you should be open, and we can address the concerns and conflicts, so that we keep those conflicts outside our sport, so that when we are there, we are actually performing for the team.
Okay, okay. So tell me this, Disha, since I am talking about how I am, and I felt like I will let the team down, I'll talk about one more thing of how I am. If I do spectacularly, if I do an amazing webinar, the next time I'm doing a webinar, I am thinking, oh my God, am I going to be at that level? Is it going to top that webinar? It's like, more than that, more than that. So, looping back to sports, are athletes affected more by wins or losses? Which affects them more?
Um, it's a very good question. Thank you. So we have this notion that, oh, it's losing, the fear of losing that really affects athletes. But from my experience, I've actually seen athletes be more nervous after they've broken the national records, or they have this pressure like, oh my God, everyone expects I'm going to perform. And everyone is looking at me like the spotlight is on me. And that kind of creates a pressure of recreating success. So you're actually even fearing success in many cases. You're like, I hope I'm able to do it. What happens if this happens? So there are those aspects which we need to understand. It's not just loss that kind of, you know, makes you're fearing, and that's why you are motivated, or it's not just loss that helps you, results in not performing well, but even winning, approaching it, and how you actually, get scared of it is something which is a very common factor in sports. And they all, like, these are very common, we don't discuss it, but I've actually seen fear of success a lot more in sports of late. So yeah, that's something which is very common.
Yeah, you are going to have to coach me because fear of success is something that scares me. If I do something really well, I get scared. Like, how am I going to replicate
Yeah,
that?
it's suddenly it's like, you're questioning your identity and your worth. Like, was it really me who's doing it? And I think it's like, because we've never really thought we had that ability to do it. And I've seen that with some people, like, when I was doing it and did that, like, I performed the way I wanted to. I'm like, is it really me? Because you've never expected yourself to have. So more than anything, it's also about how you really view yourself. It comes with its self-worth and identity. These two aspects also play a very important role along with your orientation when it comes to these phenomena.
So one more thing that I wanted to ask is some people, like athletes, like people, there can be extroverts and introverts. So when they are in the field, right, and the whole stadium is cheering for you, some athletes draw energy from
Mhm.
that, and it makes them more energetic. It makes them like feel like, yes, I can do this, right? And they draw positivity. But some are not like that. The more cheering that happens, they are like, okay, I can't focus. So how do you help these people differently? And is there different techniques that you give them? What sort of techniques do you give them?
Uh, So one is simple as control what is in your hand, control the controllables. That's something which is the easiest which we can tell them. We kind of, or second is, help them understand their optimal zone of arousal. So that means some people like to perform, when their arousal levels are much higher. And there are some who like to perform when their arousal levels are lower. So that's where the noise outside impacts them. So if it's like, okay, someone who likes to perform with a lot of more energy. So, that's where when they get that cheering from outside, they get more energetic, and they learn to, we learn come up with strategies to help maintain the arousal level through that. Whereas some, who, because they like to perform with a lower arousal level, perhaps that's why also when, that cheering could lack of it, or quiet, when there's no one cheering for them, it really helps them, because they can connect with themselves, and they can just understand that feeling of the body, and they can perform. So that's also one aspect. I think one thing which also is very important is reframing the situation, or the thoughts that come up then, because like I remember with some, athletes were like, oh, they were cheering. I was like, okay, what about it was something we can, how about we reframe it? Maybe they were not cheering so much, we kind of also put it like, there's a little bit of, we put it on another person. It's like, okay, maybe they were cheering for someone else. Maybe they were cheering because they believed in me, and they knew that I have it. That's why they, and try to draw confidence from it, but not let it become your overconfidence. So have those little conversations and come up with strategies to, address that point, and also what about it really affects them.
Mm.
So I think that's very important when we're kind of working with that public attention and everything.
Yeah, I think a lot of that translates even into workforce as well.
Mhm.
How you can, get that optimal level of
Yep.
arousal and reframing and all of that. So I just want to take a minute to tell the audience, if you have any questions, post it in the chat. We will be taking questions from you right now. But Disha, I wanted to ask you one more thing. How prevalent is sports psychology currently in India? I think that there is a lot more openness to it. There's a lot more openness to mental health in general and counseling in general, and a lot more openness to sports psychology. But do you believe that sports psychology or psychologist should also be there in schools and colleges where we teach children sports? Do you think it will help if we have that?
I think so. Honestly, though, when I was interested in sports psychology, I think at that time there were just a few sports psychologists that I could reach out to, and I think most of them are now my friends or peers. But now things are changing. I've seen a lot more sports psychologists coming up. There are sports psychology courses in India, the diplomas that are happening. So I think it's a very positive change that, there is that openness we can see. And yes, I think we can actually, it'll be good to have sports psychology support at, schools or colleges, maybe, for some people to, it'll be good because, let's say you're in a school, which is a very sporty school, and they are sending a team for a competition. And if a sports psychologist could come and work and help the team perform better, it will actually be good, because, at that young age, that's where athletes or children are understanding a lot about the sport, understanding themselves. So it will be nice if someone is there who can guide them and help them. So I've not really seen this in India. I think we were having this conversation even before the webinar started. I think it'll be good to see that, where, some schools and colleges, where they can bring in a sports psychologist, or to work with their teams who are actually trying to be, or work at a national or represent at an international stage, or for their students who are, representing internationally. So it will be a good opportunity, even if they are wanting to represent nationally. It'll be a good opportunity for sports psychologists and the athletes there. And I remember when I was in college in Loughborough University, um, we had seen a lot of like a lot of our batchmates. We had the opportunity to work with the university teams, like within Loughborough. So some got hockey, some got cricket, some got netball, rugby. We all were divided, and that was a very nice opportunity for us to work. So the students also got a psychologist. They also had someone who was observing, helping them. The coaches had someone who helped them, and then there were students like us who were also getting that experience of understanding or getting, a proper internship. It was like our internship there. So we got that opportunity to see different sports, to learn from it, understand what observation, what needs analysis look like, have a supervisor there, and understand, like now when I look back, I can really understand the difference between the Indian system and the UK system. So it has given me a perspective, and there were a lot of learnings from it.
Okay, all right. So there is a question from the audience, actually two questions from the same person. Um, the question is, I think, based on India specific. So I know you did your sports psychology outside of India. See if you can answer this question, Disha, which is, what is the scope for sports psychology? Okay, you can probably talk about it in India. What is the scope for sports psychology, and how to become a sports psychologist? Any specific courses or qualification? And the same follow up, if I want to apply for a job as a sports psychologist, where and how do I go and apply?
So, first, the scope of sports psychology is actually there right now. We can see an increase in openness for sports psychologists. There are a lot of people who have full-time jobs, a lot who are consultants, as in they come and go in a company. There are a lot who have a private practice. And I've also seen sports psychologists who focus on research, who are lecturers, or some who are working with elite level, they're working at a grassroots level with a more like a not-for-profit organization. And there are people who even work in like state government organizations to, for the developmental and elite level. So I personally started at a state government organization myself, and I started from grassroots and went up to elite, developmental, then elite. And there are a lot of such opportunities. So I think in the scope is only going to get better because now that we have courses in India and we have people who are uh, open and there are companies who are taking out jobs for sports psychologists. So how to become a sports psychologist? Um, I would say there are different routes. So let's say there are two routes, and mostly one is if someone wants to become a sports scientist and get into sports psychology as a specialization, or become a psychologist and specialize in sports psychology, or there are these two routes that are there. So let's say if you are someone who's been doing sports science and want to specialize in sports psychology and do a diploma in sports psychology, you may not be a sports psychologist, but you can actually be a sports scientist and work with a specialization in psychology. Um, then again, there are people who can do a master's in sports psychology in India or outside and become a sports psychologist. Um, I have also seen a lot of my colleagues who've done counseling psychology, clinical psychology, and they've done a diploma in sports psychology. And because there isn't a proper course really, and even the courses, and I don't know the quality of it, so it would be wrong for me to comment on it. But if you feel that okay, I've gotten a good university, I've gotten a good qualification in counseling, and I just specialize in sport and do a diploma that can help me understand the theories and the theoretical aspect of sports, and then I start working in sports academies, it can be an opportunity for you to become a sports psychologist. So there are these few routes. um, for if you're wanting to look for courses, I think there are 6 to 7 universities in India that have MSc sports psychology or MA sports psychology. I know there is a university in Chennai, in Chandigarh, I think Guru Nanak Dev University. There are universities in Rajasthan. So you could just have a look. If not, you could, and if it is possible to go outside India and do a course, there are many courses in UK, Australia, Germany, US, or even I've heard a lot of people go to European countries as well, other European countries, and do courses. And there are, and or a proper master's, and that is a possibility to do. So do go ahead, look for it. But I think having a master's is very important. Personally, I think you can't just become a sports psychologist with a BSc degree and a diploma. But having a master's is very important. Master's in psychology, sports science is very important, at least. And as for going for a job, a lot of job opportunities. There are government organizations like Sports Authority of India. There are state government organizations like you'll have states like Odisha, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh. I think even I've seen Maharashtra have ads for sports psychologist. I've even seen, I remember seeing a state, I think it was Haryana, which had taken out an ad for sports psychologists. So there are many states like this who take out ads for sports psychologists. there are a lot of private enterprises and entities who have full-time sports psychologists. So I think, when you do be a part, connect with a lot of people, because in sports psychology, because a lot of ads may not be on LinkedIn, but may also come through connections. So do connect with people so that you understand more about the jobs and what are the opportunities there at the moment.
So this is from the same person who asked about the studies and the opportunities. They're saying, I'm currently studying masters in psychology. You said that masters is essential. And they're saying, I have done bachelor's in psychology and PE. What do you suggest from here? Should they do a sports psychology again on top of that?
So if you've done a master's in psychology and you've done, I think bachelor's in PE means you've done BPED, which is Bachelor's of Physical Education. I think I think that is a good qualification. Even if you can do, like, I think there are a few 1 year courses, diplomas in India and outside, which are in sports psychology or certification courses. If you could do that, that will actually help you a lot. You can actually even work as an intern under a sports psychologist or at an academy where you have a supervisor who's a sports psychologist, so that you are getting the experience, the practical experience of psychology or sports psychology. So try to see if that is a possibility, and you can figure these are things which I had personally done when I was starting the field. So I think that I could suggest that to you, that these are routes you can take up.
Yeah, it's interesting that you spoke about internship because that is one of the next question. Says, hi, could you please provide information regarding internships in sports psychology, where job itself, you said it doesn't come through LinkedIn, it goes through connects and contacts and everything. So how about internships?
So internships again, so if you are seeing companies that have sports psychologists or they have a sports psych division, perhaps you can reach out to them, apply, or you can connect with the sports psychologists, and see if they're looking for interns. There are a lot of spaces which are open, which are providing internships to, especially those who are pursuing a master's or have just completed a master's. So I think that I think internship shouldn't be difficult. I had done my internship in a hospital that had a sports medicine and rehab division. So perhaps, if you see a hospital which has a sports medicine or a rehab center, or any such a sports medical clinic, and they have a sports psychologist coming in, you can actually consider that and connect there and see if there's an internship opportunity there. So there are multiple ways of and multiple spaces of reaching out for internships. Also, one suggestion is look for NGOs or I think NGOs, there are a lot of sports for development NGOs. So if you feel that that's something if exercise psychology or sports for social development is something that resonates with my goals and with what I want, see if you can do an internship there as well, or do a project there, or be a volunteer there. That these opportunities also really open up a lot of um, spaces for you. But I always say that do an internship under someone there's a psychologist or a supervisor for you, so that you can learn a lot from them.
Okay, thank you for that, Disha. We are almost at time, but I wanted to ask you one question. Um, if there was one concept from sports psychology that you think we should apply outside of sports in general counseling or for people outside of sports, what is that one thing that you would say, pick it up from here, it applies really well outside as well?
I don't think there's just one concept, sorry. But I think, when I have worked with athletes, and there's certain things which I've seen how aware they are of themselves, that intentional training and focus, and, they're so conscious of their, I'm not saying self-conscious only, but they're just so consciously, or they're just so aware of what they're doing and the surroundings. I think that's something which I really picked up a lot personally in my work, in my own personal space. And I think that is something which we can work on. a lot in our own way, like, how to be more aware, how to put in that conscious effort into our work. Also, when with sports psych, I've also seen there are days like, people, despite all that things, how are they so performance oriented? Like there's a well-being aspect, but there's also a performance that they both are going simultaneously. It's not like two different, do different things. So I realized that, okay, even in real life and, despite certain challenges, you can actually function, and how to find that, like how to find that space between those two things can go together. Of course, there are days when you don't compromise on yourself. You don't be like, oh, I don't take a break. Breaks are for people who don't really believe in work or something. But I think those two things can actually go together. That, this whole perform, you don't, you perform and you can also be healthy and happy can actually coexist. And I think that was something which is very important to understand and find strategies, which is there, like that comes from a lot of self awareness, understanding yourself, understanding when to do what to do, because that is a very important thing, and you know yourself the best and you know the environment you are in the best, so understand what is best in which situation. I think these are a few things that is there. And I think one thing which I think a lot of us which we forget is having that belief in ourselves. When I see a lot of athletes, they know that anything can happen. There are a lot of unfamiliar, uncertain situations, but that belief they have in their potential is very important. They need to know that, oh, I have done everything possible and I have it really in me to, I am someone who really has done a lot, is prepared for everything, is ready for everything. And I really have it that no matter what happens, I can handle that situation. That kind of belief in your abilities is very important. And that kind of helps you pass through a lot of challenges or unfamiliar, uncertain situations there. I know it is a little daunting and it's easier said, but I think that really is something which helps athletes, and it can help a lot of us.
Really love that when you said performance and well-being go together. They are not, disjointed. They are actually going together. I'm really sorry. There is one a question, and I will stop after this. This is the last question. Working in sports psychology, should we have a backup career, or is being a sports psychologist enough? That's a very interesting question. I will probably leave the last question for later. You may get in touch with Disha directly to ask about that. But can you just please answer this one? Is being sports psychologist enough? And I will extend it a little bit more. If you have studied sports psychology, can you practice outside of sports as well?
So I'll answer the first question. Like, as in, is it is it enough to be like being a sports psychologist, or do you need a backup career? I personally did not need a backup career. I'm not saying that I'm like I've had friends who've not, but then there are people I've seen, they've had to, the initial few years they actually had sports psychology and they did something else. And it depends. Again, I know I'm saying a lot of it depends, but actually it does. It's very specific, individual specific. So I think that's something which you'll have to explore and see what are the kind of opportunities. Um, I've had friends who've been in sports as in like a sports manager and then as a psychologist, or they've had different other professions and while they were trying to understand sports psych. But I and a few of my friends, we've not had that issue, touch wood. But I think it depends on what skills you bring, the kind, what are you, uh, how good you are at your job, and the company, how much are they willing to pay. Again, initially the pay wasn't back when I was starting, the pay wasn't the best. I don't know the pay for the starting or for a fresher at the moment, but it does get better if you start performing or start showing your work well. I'm not saying showing as in putting it on social media and talking, oh, I worked with this athlete, I went with this athlete to this competition, but it's also about, like seeing the effect of your work. And that does come when athletes talk about you. The coaches say, oh, I did work with this person and it really helped my athlete. So these are ways where, it helps. Yes. Could you please repeat your second question? Sorry, I missed it.
Um, Not a problem. If you become a sports psychologist or if you have studied for a sports psychologist, can you practice outside sports as well in general counseling?
Um, I think you can become a performance psychologist. You can work with institutions where, you or in companies like where you see a lot of performance related concerns because you will be dealing with that. In a lot of sports psychology courses, you may not be introduced to counseling. You will be introduced to counseling as an approach, like CBT as an approach or ACT as an approach, but not to the therapy or as a therapeutic process. So that's why I said that maybe, as someone who's a performance psychologist, not doing general counseling, or someone as an exercise psychologist, yes. So my degree was sport and exercise psychologist. So I worked when I had come back. I remember I came back during COVID and I had started off as a performance psychologist and an exercise psychologist initially, and a sports psychologist when I was working with recreational athletes, grassroots athletes. I was working with a few high performers or people who were trying to understand how to perform or had some performance related concerns where they were not feeling that they were functioning because of some concerns and how to address that. And there were, I have not worked so much with exercise after I've come back with my master's, but before that, yeah, I did see a lot about, how we introduced aspects of sports into our therapeutic approach of, work where we work closely with a clinical psychologist or a counseling psychologist, and we try to help, come up with programs or help an individual work out or be a part of a group or a cohort where, they and build their relationship with their food and their workout. So which kind of helps them understand themselves as it empowers them in a different way. And it makes them feel more, like it builds their confidence, their self-efficacy, like, oh, we have these things in us, and it kind of is also a way for them to interact with others, which when they kind of cut off when they have concerns, and especially clinical concerns as this isolation, you kind of bring them out of that. So it really, I had seen that with exercise psychology a lot. So there are these few areas you can definitely explore. um only if your course includes aspects of counseling and you are trained with counseling methods, or you've done a course or a certification, definitely I think that's a possibility to go into the counseling space as well.
All right. Okay, that is very helpful. Thank you. And Disha, thank you so much. You have given such valuable advice throughout to us. And this side of psychology is very new to me and probably some of our audience as well. And your insights have been very eye-opening. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Veda. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed being here and having these good conversations. Thank you so much.
All right. And also, audience, I know we ran over a little bit, but thank you for staying here patiently. And you've been amazing and very good, timely, and thoughtful questions. For more information about upcoming webinars from Zensible, please do join our Zen Circle WhatsApp group. I will see you all in the next webinars. Bye. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.